Mom's words hit me like a stone thrown from a great height. "You belong in the basement," she said, her tone sharp and final, like it had been rehearsed for years. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't even look up. I stayed silent, feeling the sting, the injustice, the sheer weight of being dismissed in my own home. My dad was sitting across the room, his expression unreadable, as if he were both witness and accomplice. The air in the house felt thicker than usual, like it had absorbed every angry word, every judgmental stare, and now I was the target. I slowly made my way down the stairs, each step echoing in the dimly lit hallway, each step reminding me of how small and powerless they wanted me to feel. The basement was cold and musty, the faint smell of damp concrete and old furniture greeting me like a prison guard. I set my bag down quietly, careful not to give them the satisfaction of hearing me. They wanted me isolated, hidden, ignored. They thought that by silencing me, I would fade away, that my presence would cease to be inconvenient. But silence, I had learned, could be a powerful weapon if wielded correctly. Hours passed. I didn't make a sound. I didn't cry. I didn't even check my phone. I let them stew in their illusion of victory, letting the house grow quiet around me. And then, I began my preparation. I had been working on something for months in secret, an effort they believed was trivial, unworthy of their attention. While they were busy criticizing, controlling, and underestimating me, I had been building a plan, gathering the pieces of my escape, my vindication. This basement, meant as a punishment, became my laboratory, my workshop, my proving ground. I moved methodically. I cleared a corner, arranged my materials, and set up a small but precise system that would make them regret underestimating me. Every detail had been considered. Every step planned. While they slept or watched their television dramas, I worked quietly in the shadows, the basement's silence my only companion. There was a sense of calm in this solitude, a feeling I hadn't realized I needed until this moment. Here, I was free from their ridicule, free from their commands, free to create without judgment. When the time came, I left no trace of what I had been doing. I ascended the stairs slowly, deliberately, the creak of the steps betraying nothing. Mom was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, her voice sharp as she barked orders at Dad for the 100th time that day. Neither of them noticed me at first. They had grown used to my silence, assumed it would last forever. I let them linger in that false sense of security for a few more minutes, savoring the anticipation. Then I acted. I didn't yell, I didn't shout. I didn't even run. I revealed what I had been working on, what I had been hiding. The look on their faces was instantaneous and unforgettable. Shock, disbelief, a flicker of fear. Their words, so cutting before, now hung uselessly in the air. I could see it in Mom's eyes, the sudden realization that I was not what they had labeled me. I was more than their dismissive remarks, more than their ridicule, more than the basement itself. I had turned the situation on its head without raising my voice, without violence, without confrontation. Dad tried to speak, to regain control, but I ignored him. Mom, usually so commanding, so quick to dominate, was frozen. Her hands trembled slightly as she put down the knife. I felt no satisfaction in seeing them powerless, not truly. The satisfaction came from knowing I had remained patient, strategic, and resilient. I had let their own arrogance work against them, and now the tables had turned. I stood there, calm and collected, letting them absorb the reality I had created. They begged, indirectly at first, for me to explain, to tell them how I had done it. The confidence I felt in that moment was intoxicating. I realized that silence, patience, and preparation could be more powerful than anger, more effective than confrontation. I didn't need to scream or cry or fight. They had already handed me the tools to prove them wrong. By the end of the evening, the basement was no longer a symbol of punishment. It was a symbol of my resolve. Mom and Dad had learned, without me ever raising my voice, that underestimation was their greatest weakness. I had stayed silent, and in that silence, I had gained power. I had taken a space meant to confine me and turned it into a launching pad for my independence and validation. From that day forward, they never spoke the words again. "You belong in the basement," became a memory, a reminder of how far patience, resilience, and quiet determination could go. I had remained silent when they expected me to fight, and in that silence, I had rewritten the rules of my life. The basement had failed to imprison me, it had liberated me. And they begged, though silently, for understanding, for reconciliation, and for the respect they had so carelessly denied me. They laughed when I walked into the basement. The same words that had haunted me for years were still fresh in their minds, and their voices dripped with mockery. "Look at you," Mom sneered. "Still down here, wasting your life." Dad shook his head, more disappointed than angry, as if my presence alone was an inconvenience. They thought this was a private joke, a moment to humiliate me in the shadows, away from the eyes of the world. But they didn't know that every moment of their laughter had only sharpened my focus, strengthened my resolve, and fueled the plan I had been quietly building for months. The basement, which had once felt like a prison, had become my sanctuary. I had learned to move quietly, to work in the shadows, and to turn solitude into a weapon. While they spent their days belittling me, I had spent mine preparing for this exact moment. Every small victory, every tiny step I had taken in secrecy, had been invisible to them, but it was real. Now, the time had come to reveal the outcome. I didn't rush. I didn't yell. I let them laugh a little longer, let them enjoy their fleeting sense of superiority. Their laughter only made the reveal more powerful. I moved deliberately, picking up the stack of papers I had been working on for weeks. Contracts, letters, documents, each carefully crafted, each a reflection of my patience and foresight. Mom's laughter faltered slightly when she saw the papers, but she quickly masked it, assuming it was just curiosity. Dad leaned closer, trying to read over my shoulder, as if proximity would give him an edge. He had no idea that proximity alone couldn't undo months of preparation. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, even, unshakable. "You thought I belonged down here," I said, letting the weight of the words hang in the stale basement air. "You thought silence would make me disappear. You thought hiding me away would make me powerless. But it hasn't." Their faces registered confusion, then disbelief, then a creeping panic. I watched as the reality I had constructed slowly dawned on them. The person they had mocked, dismissed, and hidden away was now holding the power. I laid out the evidence of my work, step by step, showing how I had turned the basement, once a symbol of their control, into the proving ground for my success. Every small achievement they had ignored, every effort they had underestimated, now stood as proof that their assumptions were wrong. Mom's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a paper, but I moved it just out of reach, letting her desperation grow. Dad's eyes darted between the documents and me, his disbelief slowly morphing into fear. For the first time in years, they realized that I had not only survived their attempts to diminish me but had thrived in spite of them. Their laughter had completely vanished. Mom opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Dad tried to interject, but his voice faltered, weak against the quiet authority I now commanded. They were used to control, used to being the ones who dictated outcomes, and suddenly that control was gone. The basement, which had once imprisoned me physically and emotionally, had become the stage where I asserted my independence. I had used their own underestimation as a tool, and now they were powerless to stop me. I didn't gloat. I didn't mock. I simply allowed them to feel the shift, to understand the consequences of their arrogance. Their embarrassment was not my goal. My goal was clarity, validation, and the demonstration that silence and patience could outweigh cruelty and mockery. They begged, though their pride made it indirect at first. They asked questions through hesitant tones, through careful phrasing, through the tiniest hints of acknowledgement. How did you?" Mom began, and Dad followed, his voice strained and uncertain. I answered simply, methodically, each explanation a reinforcement of the truth they had refused to see. I was capable, resilient, and unstoppable. The basement that had been my cage became a testament to my strength. Every shadow, every corner, every dusty old item they thought would remind me of my lowly place now stood as a witness to my triumph. They realized too late that by trying to confine me, they had only given me the space I needed to grow beyond their reach. What they thought was a punishment had become a proving ground. What they thought was humiliation had become empowerment. And they were forced to confront the reality that I no longer depended on their approval or recognition. By the end of the evening, their attitudes had completely shifted. Mom and Dad, who had once dismissed me with a word, now stood in quiet awe, their arrogance replaced with an uncomfortable mixture of respect and fear. They begged, finally, though subtly, for guidance, for understanding, for insight into how I had accomplished what they thought impossible. I had not only survived their ridicule but had transformed their perception of me entirely. The basement, meant to break me, had instead elevated me. As I left the basement that night, I didn't look back with anger or spite. I left with a sense of satisfaction, of quiet victory, of knowing that their laughter could no longer define my life. The basement was no longer a place of shame or fear, it was a symbol of resilience, strategy, and silent power. And in that silence, in that patient, calculated waiting, I had forced them to beg, not for mercy, but for understanding of what they had always underestimated, me.